It's the circle of sin, and it suckers us all in. Well, in our first reading today from Genesis, we hear about the fall. We've been hearing all this week about the two different stories of creation, and now we arrive at the fall. And we see in this first reading not only the beginning of sin, which is why we call it original sin, the first sin, but also how each time we sin, we also get sucked into this circle of sin. And so there are similarities between this first story and our own experience of sin. First of all, we hear that the evil one, the snake, say to Eve, "Did God really say that you can't eat of any of the trees in the garden?" Now, what the evil one is doing here is saying, look, if you have all these other beautiful, wonderful trees that you can eat of, why wouldn't you eat of this wonderful, beautiful tree? He's essentially saying, what difference does this one tree make? He's trying to discredit this tree and kind of put it all on an even playing field. And sin does that to us too. The evil one tries to say, what difference does this sin make? Or everybody else is doing it. Or how will that, it won't even matter. Just do it if everybody else is doing it. So he tries to justify by putting everything on the same playing field. What difference does it make? The second thing the evil one does is say, Eve responds and says, no, God didn't say that we couldn't eat of any of them, just of this one. And the evil one says, oh, that's not true. That's not the case. You won't die. Not only that, but you'll get special powers. You'll get even better things will come your way. This is the second lie the evil one uses with sin, is to say, you're missing out. If you don't sin, you're missing out on part of life. You got to live your life. You only live once, right? So the evil one wants us to think that when we follow a life of Christ, there's something missing, that there's something incomplete about us. We're not truly human. We're doing something that's unnatural in following God. So the third thing, notice, that happens is they experience shame. They recognize their nakedness. What was not a cause for shame in the past, but a sign of God's goodness and of God creating them, is now something that they're ashamed of. Same too for us. Sin always has that consequence of shame. So, first of all, that idea of what's the big deal if I do this or that. The second thing, which reminds us that makes us think that we're missing out on something. And the third thing, that we end up with shame. This is the cycle that we find ourselves falling into over and over and over again. But I love that there's a connection, a great connection in our Catholic faith between the first reading of the fall and our gospel today, where Jesus touches a man who's deaf and unable to speak. And he puts his hands and his fingers in his ears and his mouth and says, "Ephphatha," that is, be opened. Because in the rite of baptism, where we are washed of that original sin we hear about in our first reading, there's a little rite called the Ephphatha rite, where the priest or the deacon makes the sign of the cross over the baby or the person to be baptized ears and mouth and says, "May the Lord soon touch your ears to receive his word and his mouth to proclaim the faith through Christ our Lord." What Christ does is Christ always restores us to how we were meant to be. He restores our nature to what we are called to be. He recreates us in baptism and through the sacraments. So, as we look at these readings today, which of these things of this cycle of sin do you find yourself falling into? And where do you need Christ's healing touch to come and recreate you again today?